Some Western countries are now turning to Iran to help end the war in Syria. These countries seem to also have changed their mind about President Bashar al-Assad, saying he could be a part of the transition. But can Tehran deliver, and why is Assad now part of the solution? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. It all began more than 4.5 years ago with Syrians protesting and demanding change. But since then, nearly 200,000 people have been killed. Hundreds of thousands of others have been injured, and millions of Syrians have been forced to flee from their country. Despite all this, there doesn't seem to be any clear solution to the conflict in Syria. And the situation on the ground has been complicated by Russia's recent decision to increase its military presence inside the country. As world leaders gather in New York for the UN's annual summit, the US and its allies are reaching out to Iran in the hopes of finding a solution. We'll get to our guests in just a moment, but first, James Bays sets up our discussion from New York.
All eyes will be on Russian President Vladimir Putin when he makes a whistle-stop trip to New York, spending less than a full day in the US to attend the United Nations General Assembly. Everyone wants to know what his intentions are regarding Syria. On one hand, a Russian military build-up. Putin has sent Marines, helicopters and tanks to a base in Latakia on Syria's coast. On the other, he says he wants a political solution. In an interview with Talk to Al Jazeera, I asked the EU's High Representative, Federica Mogherini, if she'd been given any idea what Russia was up to.
I was talking about that with our Russian friends, with Lavrov in these days. And last time I talked to him about this, his fear was that of a complete collapse of the state structures in Syria. This could be one of the reasons why Russia is acting in this way, but it could also be a willingness to show the fact that Russia is an important, substantial player in this crisis.
Syria was on the agenda too when US Secretary of State John Kerry met Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif in New York, but neither was prepared to discuss exactly what was said away from the cameras.
I'm not going to go into each of them individually right now, but I view this week as a major opportunity for any number of countries to play an important role in trying to resolve some of the very difficult issues of the Middle East.
President Obama will address the General Assembly on the same day as President Putin Monday. He'll be aware of some recent setbacks for US policy. The Pentagon has admitted that some of those it's been training, so-called moderate rebels, have handed over some of their equipment, vehicles and ammunition to the al-Nusra Front. Another development involves Iraq, a key member of the US coalition against ISIL. According to Russia, Iraq will join it, Iran, and controversially, President Assad's Syrian regime in setting up a new military coordination centre to be based in Baghdad. James Bays, Al Jazeera, New York.
There's certainly a lot to talk about, so let's bring in our guest in Tehran, Hassan Ahmadian, Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Strategic Research and a specialist on Iran, Middle East politics and security trends. In Dubai, Ubay Shabanda, Managing Director of Orient Media. And in Geneva, Jean-Marc Rickley, Associate Fellow at the Geneva Centre for Security Policy. Very warm welcome to all three of you. Let me start off with you, Hassan Ahmadian. What is the response in Iran to this gesture to now make Iran a bigger player in Syria?
Well, I think Iran has a big role in there as a party that have a lot in this crisis, a lot of interests and a lot of at stakes in this country, both nationally, regionally and internationally. I think putting Iran or bringing Iran into the any kind of negotiated settlement will help ease a lot of problems that have been facing this sort of dealing with the Syrian crisis. I think this recognition of Iran's role that Iran can and will play in this crisis will help a lot in any compromise over the future of Syria. I think the problem was that there are parties in the region that didn't want to recognize Iran's role in the region and couldn't accept Iran's involvement in any settlement, and they were saying that Iran is a part of the problem. I think this sort of thinking about the a regional crisis and an international crisis led the Syrian crisis into this stage, and this recognition of Iran's role will help to get rid of this sort of dealing with the situation and get to real talks about the future of Syria and how to solve the crisis in there and reach a compromise, a negotiated compromise in there.
Abay Shabanda, what didn't you like about that? You've been nodding away furiously.
Look, well, certainly Iran is a party to the conflict in Syria, mainly because the Iranian government, and specifically the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, have played such an outsized role in perpetuating the conflict in Syria and propping up the Assad regime's militias as they fight the Syrian rebels and the Syrian people. Look, there should be no doubt that the Iranian regime here is attempting to play both the role of arsonist and fireman, whereas they're attempting to position Bashar al-Assad as a legitimate sovereign regime government that is a solution to fighting ISIS, the Islamic State, or Daesh, when in reality that we also have to remember that the Iranian regime has also pumped in thousands of foreign fighters, of Shia extremist fighters that are perpetuating the sectarian conflict in Syria. These are militia forces that the Iranian Revolutionary Guards have trained and have been accused and guilty, really, quite frankly, of committing some horrible atrocities in Syria against the Syrian people. So to claim that the Iranian regime is a solution, that it must play a role in the solution in Syria, overlooks the fact that it is really a driving force of the conflict in Syria at the same time.
But if you're going to talk to Iran, you're going to talk to Assad. I mean, why not bring in all the players if they're that important? What's the difference?
Well, the difference here is that the Iranian government is not looking for a peaceful settlement in Syria. They are looking simply to prop up the Assad regime and to perpetuate the rule of the Assad government. So we really have to look at the true objectives here. If truly Iran's objective is to fight extremism in Syria and the Islamic State, then why did the Iranian government just last week release some senior leaders from al-Qaeda that were imprisoned in Tehran, many of whom will probably find their way back to Syria? So again, we see this hypocritical role being played by Tehran as both arsonist and fireman in Syria.
Jean-Marc Rickley, which side of that argument do you find yourself sitting? I mean, clearly Iran is a big player, good or bad. Is it a good move that they were included?
If we look at the latest diplomatic moves, it's not so much Iran which is actually playing a major role. It's rather Russia. And what we're witnessing now, there are two ways to look at that. You could look at this current affair as being a diplomatic success of the Russians and ends of the Iranians, because obviously Russia and Iran are supporting the Assad regime. But you could also look at this, the current forces on the ground right now as being a result of the depletion of Assad's forces and its supporter, i.e. different Iranian militia, Hezbollah, and also support from the Russians. So in a way, it was a last attempt to support the Assad regime. And what we're witnessing right now is a situation where the different sides have to take position. The first one being that it's a conflict between the East and the West, Russia and the West, and it's about ISIS. I think we have a common interest here. They have a common interest to settle the problem. It's just the means that are very different. And behind that, obviously, every state and every party plays its own national interest. In the case of the Russian, it's to maintain its position in the region. And I think in the current balance of power in the Assad regime, what we're witnessing is that Russia is rather calling the shots than Iran. So I think currently the solution to the problem lies with Russia. And we'll see what will happen in the next General Assembly that is supposed to start next week, tomorrow.
Obey, do you think Syria and Iran have been taken hostage by Putin's geopolitical goals here?
Absolutely, no doubt. And we also have to remember that the recent Russian intervention and escalation of Russian intervention in Syria, some say Russian invasion, really came about after a secret meeting that was held in Moscow by Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general who heads the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's Quds Force, where apparently an agreement was reached between Tehran and Russia to send in advisors, tanks, gunships, attack helicopters, attack aircraft to prop up the Assad regime at a time when the Assad regime has been facing a myriad of setbacks on the battlefield, both in northern and southern Syria. So it really seems that we have now an occasion where the Russians and the Iranians are not simply advising Bashar al-Assad as much as they are co-leading the war against the Syrian people and really adding more fuel, as it were, to the fire in the Syrian civil war, as we're seeing it unfold today. So
is
really,
that the
Russians and the
Hassan?
Iranians.
Well, I think there are different arguments here. I think we should be very careful about the information we use. Talking about Qasem Soleimani going to Russia, this is information that are not, you cannot base your argument on. You cannot say that Iran released Al-Qaeda figures without, these are in the press. They are, you cannot
so you're saying
use
there's no
this
truth
information to support your argument.
This was confirmed in the New York Times and multiple international press, Hassan. Okay, it may not have been confirmed by the Iranian press, but it absolutely was confirmed by the international press. It just happens not to be the liking of the Iranian government for this information to be out to the public.
Well, I think these still are information that are not, confirmed neither by Russia nor by Iran. Well, let's set aside this one. Let me tell you, this argument about Iran being a part of the problem have prolonged, or the Assad regime have been a part of the problem, have prolonged this crisis. I think this Iranian policies in the region, overall the region, and in particular in Syria, should be taken into consideration in analyzing these policies, that Iran's policies in there have been reaction to its rivals' action in there. They sent thousands of, militias, extremists into Syria first. They sent, arms into Syria first, and
Absolutely
then Iran
not.
started to, step up its support for the Syrian government.
Okay, Hassan, sorry, let me just put this to Jean-Marc. I mean, Jean-Marc, it seems very evident that there are no real clean players when it comes to what's happening in Syria. You've got the US administration who've been giving arms to some of the opposition groups, and that's fallen into the hands of Al-Qaeda. You've got Iran stirring. You've possibly got Russia stirring. It's not a very good collection of players here, is it?
No, I mean, the situation is very complex and is highly volatile and has been evolving quite a bit over the last four years and a half. And yes, you're right. So you have basically two camps, which are those supporting Assad, as I said before, Iran and Russia, and the camp who wants to see Assad leave power, the West and the Sunni Arab states. And on top of that, all this play relies on local proxies. Some are Shia militia, other are Sunni militia, and on top of that, you have ISIS. So what we're witnessing on the ground is a very volatile situation where looks like now, the goal of saying, hell, we will, the Russians are getting in this conflict, say we will only target ISIS, will be very difficult, because if you look at the position of the military bases, they are all in the western part of the country along the Mediterranean Sea, whereas ISIS stronghold is in the eastern side of the country. It means that there will be some overlaps with the rebels that are underground, who are supported by the West and the Sunni Arab states. And therefore, we cannot exclude that there will be some kind of fights in the future. I think there has been reports that Jaish al-Islam, which is a militia that is supported by Saudi Arabia, already has wants to target the Russians. So there is a huge potential here for the situation to spill out of control. And what will comes out of that, frankly, no one knows right now, because the alliance are shifting so quickly that we cannot see a clear direction.
Okay, before we look at who controls what, and a map that we have here of Syria, let me just ask you very quickly, Ube, you know, Russia has increased its presence from a military point of view under the guise that it's there to fight ISIL. How come Russia has suddenly been able to resuscitate itself when it's come to this situation? What is the conversation that's going on behind closed doors regarding Putin and his plan?
Well, what's interesting here is that Vladimir Putin and Ayatollah Khamenei share a common paranoia in Syria, and so much that they both believe that the Syrian uprising against Bashar al-Assad was somehow this plot by the West and regional Sunni Arab states to weaken Russia's influence and to weaken Iran's influence, and to ultimately also weaken a key supporter to the Lebanese Hezbollah Shia militia, Lebanese Hezbollah. So the reason why we're seeing these past 15 days, every single day for the past 15 days, we've been seeing Russian cargo aircraft attack helicopters, attack aircraft, troops, Marines, and tanks flooding into northwestern Syria, also drones. So Vladimir Putin's calculus here is that he believes that he can ensure that his key proxy, a proxy that is shared by Iran, namely Bashar al-Assad, will remain in power. This isn't really so much about the fight against Daesh, as so much it is cementing the rule of a key proxy for Moscow and Tehran.
OK, now, in the 4 years of fighting, control of territory has changed hands many times. It is a war of attrition that has left the government's forces on the back foot, defending state institutions and their strongholds in the east. The political vacuum has left the door open for the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant to make huge gains, most recently in the central corridor. The Syrian opposition controls large parts of the north and southwest, making gains in Dera and Quintera. There have also been advances for al-Nusra Front, most recently the provincial capital of Idlib in the northwest. The Kurdish Popular Protection Units, or the YPG, have also been battling ISIL for control of their territory. And this is what government forces control. So little, in fact, that in July, President Assad conceded that his troops are overstretched and can't be in all areas of the country. I mean, Hassan, when you look at that map, you look how little of the country Bashar al-Assad controls. How successful will it be supporting him in any peace process going forward? What control over the rest of Syria does he have?
Well, I think in times of conflict, you don't look at the ground, at the land without the people on it. The demographic geography is more important in times of conflict. He controls, or the Syrian government control, more than 60% of the Syrian population now. Although the land is, out of his control, most of the Syrian territory is out of his control. But the demographic geography, most of it, or the majority of the Syrians, are under his government. So this is one thing. And the other, I think, thinking of eliminating a party from the peace process has led to this prolonged war. Now that this Russian role brought balance to the international level of the Syrian crisis, because these parties in the region, there were parties in the region that were basing their they were looking to the West as the final protector of their strategy in Syria. We're looking to bring the United States to topple Bashar al-Assad. Now, with the Russians stepping up their involvement in Syria, I think this balance of power in the international level has brought some pragmatism to will bring some pragmatism to these parties in the region, and will help to go on with a compromise with the Syrian regime, with the opposition, and with the parties involved. I think this balance was there in a national level in Syria, and was there in a regional level, but was absent in an international level. Now that Russia is in, I think this balance of power has come to Syria, and recognizing that the Syrian government cannot be just eliminated from the scene.
It seems, if I'm correct, sorry, excuse me, jumping in here, we've got two rival coalitions against the ISIL and contradictory peace process underway here. Would any settlement be worth the paper it's been written on? I mean, who's going to honour it, particularly in the light of some of the atrocities we've seen over the last couple of weeks?
The question now is, well, who actually, even though you come to an agreement, what kind of agreement can you reach? And well, the common denominator to all these things, as I mentioned before, the fight against ISIS. Now, the problem is who you want to have in place for a transition of government, because all the different parties realize that if there is a vacuum of power, if Assad leaves, there will be probably spaces for ISIS to fill, and that no one wants to have that. The West and the Sunni Arab states obviously wants Assad to leave. The West would be probably much more open to see him having a transition period of 6 months. There was a plan 2 weeks ago proposed by the UK to keep Assad for 6 months and then leave power to a transition government. Obviously, these are diplomatic problems that will probably be discussed in New York. And if you want, the moves that you see over the last 2 weeks, what came out of that is it has relaunched the diplomatic momentum to talk about that.
And Ube, let's not forget how this has precipitated the most horrific refugee crisis. What sort of Syria is now going to draw those refugees back home?
Well, here in Syria, you have at least around 40% of the populace has either been displaced or forced out as refugees, mainly because of the Assad regime. I mean, we're looking at thousands are fleeing, not just from the liberated territories, but now we're seeing this new trend of thousands of Syrians fleeing every week from areas under the nominal control of the Assad regime. So let's also, let's be clear here. The intervention of Russian forces, of Russian boots on the ground in Syria is not going to lead to peace. It's not going to lead to stability or to a political compromise. It's essentially injecting jet fuel into the conflict. And if you believe that Ayatollah Khamenei really is seeking a true political solution, the reality is that Ayatollah Khamenei is looking for submission under the aegis and control of the Bashar al-Assad regime. So when Moscow and Tehran talk about this new balance and seeking a compromise in Syria, the reality is they are seeking a total victory, and it is only going to perpetuate the conflict, leading to more deaths, leading to thousands of more refugees fleeing from Syria into Europe's shores. And frankly, it will strengthen the power of extremists on the ground. And so the problem here is that the Iranians and the Russians are not a good faith actor when it comes to finding a truly sustainable solution to the conflict in Syria. And that is a Syria in which Bashar al-Assad has no legitimacy to rule.
OK, and let's leave it there. Thank you very much. Just shows you how difficult a task this is to bring peace to Syria. Thank you very much, Hassan Ahmedian, Obey Shabanda and Jean-Marc Rickley. And thank you for watching. You can leave your comments via the programme page on our website, Jazeera.com. You can also post your views on Facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or tweet us at AJ Inside Story, or me at Jane Dutton. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.